Richard Martin's fingers brushed against a pulsing mass inside the grandfather clock, warm and rough as his hairless cat's silent gaze. The wood was unnaturally yielding beneath my touch, like pressing into a slow heartbeat trapped in mahogany. Moonlight, pale and thin as old lace, slanted through the leaded window, catching the dust motes dancing in the sickly peach glow of the room's ambient lighting. I'd been drawn to the clock's shadowed face all evening. The way the brass hands seemed to sink into the wood, the way the silence in the high-end smart home felt less like peace and more like a held breath. Now, the thing inside the clock stirred, a fibrous living thing thrumming with a low vibration that traveled up my arm, making the skin on my neck prickle. It's not a clock, I thought, the melancholy settling deeper. It's a cager. The high-pitched ring, that constant, needle-sharp ring in my molars, intensified, syncing with the clock's deep, rhythmic tick-tick. Tick, but the third tick was wrong. It was becoming a grinding, metallic shriek, the sound of a train brake screeching on wet tracks, echoing in the hollows of my skull. Tick, shrieky. Tick, shrieky. I pressed my thumb against the clock's face hard, the cool brass biting into my skin. The shriek cut off abruptly, leaving a ringing silence that felt heavier than the noise had been. The silence was the monster's feast. The monster that fed on silence. I had to silence it. The monster Findy needed. The silence. The shadow cat materialized beside me, stepping through the keyhole as if the metal were water. It was a silhouette, pure absence of light, no form, no fur, just a deeper dark against the sickly peach wallpaper. It landed soundlessly, a ripple in the air, not a step. Moonlight bloomed across the open diary lying on the polished walnut table. The ink, previously invisible, now appeared as if drawn by an invisible hand, blooming across the page in vain blue script. The diary, I remembered, fiffered. The ink only appears in moonlight. The cat's shadow detached from the rug where it had been resting. It didn't move. It twin-slithered, a wave of pure darkness flowing across the floorboards like spilled ink. The high-pitched ring returned, fainter now, a distant echo of the train brakes, as the shadow slid toward the moonlit diary. The sickly peach light made the vein blue ink seem to pulse. My breath hitched, a dry sound in the sudden, crushing quiet. The cat's shadow was moving toward the diary, drawn by the moonlight, by the words written in the dark. The silence was perfect. The silence was complete. The silence was the monster's victory. The shadow slithered toward the moonlit diary. The clock's hands swept past midnight, each tick echoing like a gavel falling, sealing my fate for another night in this unending loop. I opened the diary at precisely 12 o'clock, as if punctuating time itself. Moonlight flooded the room, casting everything in its sickly peach glow except where shadows pooled like ink stains. The diary lay open on the walnut table, its pages yellowed with age and neglect. Yet it felt warm to my touch, almost alive. The ink was invisible until caught by moonlight, then blooming across the page like veins under skin. I traced the words already there. She never returned from the ship. My fingers trembled as they hovered over the blank space below. The high-pitched ringing in my molars deepened into a subsonic thrum that seemed to resonate with every fiber of my being. It was like a bell tolling underwater, distant yet echoing within me. The cat's shadow shifted on the rug beside me, its absence of form and feature somehow more ominous than any concrete threat. I wrote, "She never returned from the ship," each letter precise, deliberate. As I finished, the words began to bleed into the page, tendrils of vein blue ink reaching out like roots seeking purchase. The cat's shadow flickered, its edges dissolving and reforming as I frippled by a sudden breeze. I felt something brush against my leg. It was the cat, but not quite. Its fur wasn't shimmering like oil on water tonight. Instead, it seemed to absorb all light, leaving only emptiness where it touched me. Yet there was no cold, no chill from its presence. Instead, I felt a strange warmth that pulsed with every throb of the subsonic bell. I looked down at the diary again. The ink had moved while my attention was elsewhere. Now it read, "Silence is the key." Each letter stood tall and rigid, carved into stone rather than written by hand. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that these weren't my words anymore. This wasn't just a diary. This was something else entirely. The cat's shadow stretched towards the page, its form elongating like taffy pulled too thin. It seemed to ripple again, and when it reformed there were two of them now, one mirrored perfectly over the other. Two shadows reaching for the same words, their edges overlapping in a dance macabre. I reached out tentatively with my free hand, fingers hovering above those terrible words. The high-pitched ringing crescendoed into a scream that echoed within me like a ship's bell tolling 10 times. Once for each of us trapped here, myself, the cat, and now, something else. As I touched down on the first letter, It began to glow faintly with an inner light. The diary wrote itself beneath my trembling fingers. You were always the vessel. The room spun around me as those final words appeared. The sickly peach glow seemed suddenly too bright, hurting my eyes even through squinted lids. My stomach roiled at the scent of rotting leaves that filled the air now, choking and cloying. And then silence fell like a guillotine blade, sharp and absolute. Not even the distant ringing remained, just this crushing quietude pressing down on me from all sides. The monster had claimed its prize tonight. It was feeding again. The cat's silhouette led me through the hallway, its form an amorphous void against the smart home's sickly peach glow. The walls pulsed with a low internal hum, as though the house itself was breathing. I followed, my footsteps muffled by the thick, ghostly sea fret that clung to the floor like a second skin. The air was heavy, cloying, and tasted of something I could not name, something ancient and wet. The wine cellar door slid open with a sigh, revealing a descent into darkness. The smart home's lights adjusted automatically, casting the room in that same sickly peach hue. The air here was colder, denser, and carried the scent of something fermented and forgotten. I stepped forward, my breath shallow, my pulse a steady drumbeat in my ears. Shelves lined the walls, packed with bottles that gleamed like eyes in the dim light. My gaze landed on one, its label weathered, its glass clouded with age. I reached out, fingers brushing the glass, and felt a faint vibration, as if the bottle were alive. The label read, "For the Last Voyage." My stomach twisted. I had heard that name before, whispered in the diary's ink, in the cat's silent warnings. The screech cut through the silence, a sound like a train's brakes grinding against steel. It was sharp, raw, and it split the air in two. I flinched, my hand pulling back from the bottle. Then came the sound I had not expected, the wet crunch of cork being ejected from its prison. It was not a sound of release, but of something breaking free. The cat stood on the bottle's neck, its shadow stretching like smoke across the floor. I watched, transfixed, as the cork fell to the ground with a soft, wet thud. The label on the bottle began to peel, its edges curling like burnt paper. As it lifted, revealing the words beneath, the air seemed to still. Sacrifice the anchor. The words were carved into the glass, not written. They pulsed with a blue light, faint but unmistakable. I felt the weight of the moment settle on my chest, a crushing pressure that made it hard to breathe. My mind screamed at me to run, to turn back, to forget what I had seen. But the cat remained still, its shadow unmoving, its presence a silent anchor in the storm of my thoughts. The screech returned louder now, and it was joined by another sound, the wet crunch of something else, something more. My hands trembled as I reached for the bottle, my fingers brushing the glass. The words seemed to hum beneath my touch, vibrating with a terrible knowing energy, and then, as if the house itself had exhaled, the silence returned. But it was not the silence I had known before. This was the silence of a thing waiting, watching, and waiting for me to make a choice. The water was already ankle-deep when I entered, lapping against my shoes with a greedy hunger that sent shivers up my spine. It tasted like salt and rust, bitter on my tongue as I breathed it in. The smart home's lights flickered briefly before plunging us into darkness, then returned with an urgent blue glow. Vein blue, the color of veins seen through skin too pale. The diary floated towards me, its pages bloated and heavy with water. As I reached out to grab it, the air around me seemed to still, as if holding its breath. The distant, high-pitched ringing grew louder, a symphony of nails on glass that scratched at my skull. It was the sound of silence being torn apart. Ink began to reform on the diary's pages, writhing like snakes under moonlight. I watched, transfixed and horrified, as letters formed words, "Mistress is hungry." The cat stood beside me, its shadow unfurling across the floor like an ancient map. It pulsed with a life of its own, veins of blue light tracing familiar coastlines, Barbados, Jamaica, Hispaniola. The screech returned, but it was no longer just one sound. Now there were many, layer upon layer, each rope snapping in syncopation with the others. The noise filled my head, drowning out thought, leaving only instinct behind. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped animal trying to escape. The map pulsed again, stronger this time. Water surged around me, rising fast, swallowing the diary whole before I could react. It was as if an unseen hand had reached into the room and squeezed it dry. Storm surge flooded the floor, drowning everything in its path, including the cat's shadow map, now a writhing mass of blue light beneath the water. I stumbled back, gasping for air that wasn't there. The smart home's lights flickered once more before dying completely, leaving me alone with the darkness and the sound of ropes snapping. The chorus of my own impending doom. The water was already up to my knees, pressing against me with a weight that felt unnatural, as if it were not water at all but something else, something alive. The diary floated toward me, its pages bloated and heavy with water, ink writhing like serpents under the blue glow of the smart home's lights. My fingers brushed the surface, and the air around me seemed to still, as if the world had paused to watch. Sacrifice the anchor. The ink hissed, forming words that pulsed with a sickly peach hue. I recoiled, my breath catching in my throat. The cat stood beside me, its shadow unfurling across the floor like an ancient map. But this time, I saw it clearly. Its silhouette was not just a shadow, but the ghost of a pirate captain, his face twisted in a grimace of eternal hunger. The screech returned, a high-pitched nails-on-glass sound that sliced through the air, and then shatter. A window pane exploded behind me, the sound like a scream torn from the throat of the world. The cat's shadow folded into the diary's binding, its form writhing like smoke caught in a bottle. I lunged forward, my hand closing around the diary's edge, and the shadow yielded, like wet clay slipping between my fingers. I could feel it, its presence, its weight, its hunger. It was not just a shadow, it was a thing of flesh and bone, of salt and sorrow, of a past I had tried to forget. My fingers dug into the diary, and for a moment I felt the weight of the anchor it had once held, the chain that had dragged me down, the guilt that had clung to me like a second skin. The cat's silhouette pulsed, its form flickering between the ghost of a man and the shape of a beast. I could hear its breath shallow and ragged, as if it had been trapped for centuries in this place, waiting for me to remember. The diary's ink writhed, forming new words. You must let go. The screech rose again, a sound that did not belong to this world, and I felt the pressure of the water rising, the walls closing in, the air thick with the scent of something old and rotting. My hand tightened around the diary, the shadow slipping through my fingers like sand. I could feel the weight of the anchor, the chain, the guilt. I could feel the monster that fed on silence, its hunger growing with every moment I hesitated. And then the shadow yielded, like wet clay, slipping into my palm, its form dissolving into the diary's binding. I held it, and for the first time in years I felt the weight of the past lift, just a little. The diary's leather spine was still warm beneath my fingers when I pressed it to the fire. The logs had been arranged in a perfect circle, too precise, like something meant to hold something rather than burn it. The flames answered immediately, licking up the edges of the pages with a hunger that made my stomach clench. The ink was not peach now. It was sooty vein blue, a color that didn't exist in fire, a color that pulsed like a bruise under the skin of the world. The air tasted of wet parchment, of salt, and something older, something that had been buried before the house was built. The cat watched me from the threshold of the fireplace, its shadow stretching long and liquid, pooling at the edges of the flames like oil. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just waited. The screech was there again, a high-pitched glass shredding sound that made my teeth ache. It wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from the diary itself, from the pages as they curled and blackened, from the ink that writhed like a living thing before dissolving into ash. I should have felt relief. I should have felt the weight of the past lifting. Instead, the shadow of the cat rippled, then Prero said, a black tide of smoke and sinew, twisting away from the fireplace and toward me. The words slithered from its mouth. If it had a mouth, Wistress is hungry. The voice was not the cat's. It was the voice of the sea, of the anchor dragging me down, of the diary's pages whispering in the dark. The fireplace roared, and the flames turned 20 inside out 20, revealing a hollow core of swirling blue, a vortex that seemed to pull at the edges of the room. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I threw the diary into the fire. The pages flared and the shadow food lunged, not toward me but toward me to the flames. The screech, sea-shattered not as a sound, but as the glass pane behind me, exploded, the impact sending a cascade of jagged teeth across the floor. The shadow flowed into the fireplace's maw, dissolving into the blue heart of the fire, and the heat turned tuncolti, a sudden unnatural chill that raised goosey flesh along my arms. The cat's shadow writhed in the flames, not burning, not consuming, feeding, its form elongating, stretching into something that was not a cat, not a man, but something that had been both. And then, the reflection in the glass sifter moved. Not the way a reflection should. Not the way Side moved. It tilted its head just slightly, and then it winked. The diary lies open on my lap, its pages breathing with an otherworldly life as I watch ink bloom under the moonlight like wounds. It is not just peach anymore. It is vein blue, a color that shouldn't exist outside of nightmares. My breath catches in my throat when I see words appearing without my pen touching them. The cat was never a pet. I look up from the diary to where the cat stands by the clock, a grotesque thing made of bone and iron, its hands ticking away seconds like tiny skeletal feet marching toward oblivion. The cat's shadow stretches long across the floorboards, liquid black seeping into every crevice. The screech starts softly, a high-pitched whine that seems to come from everywhere at once. It sharpens, becomes more insistent, until it sounds like something is being swept. Bone grinding against bone, metal tearing through flesh. It is the sound of agony made audible. I reach out tentatively toward the clock, my fingers brushing against its cold face. The cat doesn't move. Instead, its shadow lunges forward without warning or sound, claws raking across my wrist hard enough to draw blood. I jerk back with a cry, clutching at my arm as pain flares like fire. The wound burns and bleeds freely now, dripping onto the diary pages in fat red drops that soak into the paper hungrily. The ink blooms around them, spreading outwards like veins pulsating beneath skin. And amidst all this chaos, I swear I hear laughter, the cat's voice echoing from somewhere beyond reality. My heart pounds wildly as adrenaline surges through me. But there is something else too, doubt gnawing at the edges of my mind. What have I done? Did I release something terrible by burning that diary? The clock ticks on, indifferent to my turmoil. Its hands spin wildly now, ticking away seconds faster than they should until time itself seems to warp around me. I look back down at the diary, at those words written in blood and moonlight, and realize with a sickening lurch what I must do next. The clock's face is cold beneath my fingers, its metal surface slick with something that isn't just condensation. I twist the key, and the mechanism groans like a beast waking from a long sleep. Inside the glass, something writhes, a mass of shadow and light, pulsing in time with the ticking. It's not just a clock anymore. It's a wound, a festering thing that leaks the sickly peach mist I've come to associate with this place. The air thickens and I feel it in my lungs, like breathing in the aftertaste of a scream. The cat's shadow slithers forward, moving with a will of its own. It slides into the clock's innards, disappearing into the labyrinth of gears and springs. I can almost feel it there, pressing against the metal, fitting into the cracks like a parasite. My fingers tremble as I turn the key again, and the screech that follows is not the one I've heard before. It's deeper, more violent, like the tearing of something ancient and unyielding. It drowns in the sound of a train's brakes, metal shrieking against metal, a sound that vibrates in my bones and makes my teeth ache. The clock releases the mist, and it spreads outward in a slow, deliberate wave. It's not just a mist, it's a presence, something that clings to the air and seeps into my skin. I feel it crawling over my arms, my chest, my face. It's warm, but it burns, and I can't look away from the cat's shadow as it begins to dissolve into the mist. It's not vanishing, it's being consumed bit by bit, until all that's left is a faint outline, like a ghost in a dream. I want to scream, but the sound is locked behind my teeth. My throat is full of something thick and cloying, like the peach mist itself. I press my hands against my mouth, but the mist is already inside me, filling my lungs with its cloying sweetness. The clock ticks on, relentless and unfeeling, its hands spinning faster now, faster than they ever should. Time is unraveling, and I can feel it slipping through my fingers like sand. The cat's shadow is gone. I can't see it anymore, but I can feel it. It's in the mist, in the air, in the sound of the train's brakes that still echo in my ears. I reach for it, but my fingers pass through the mist like water, and I'm left grasping at nothing. The diary lies open on my lap, its pages still blooming with ink that pulses like a heartbeat. I can feel it now, the weight of the past pressing down on me, heavy and unrelenting. The mist thickens, and I can no longer see the clock. I can't see anything. All I can feel is the ache in my chest, the taste of the mist on my tongue, and the distant, ever-present screech that never stops. The mist ahead thickens, swirling like a living thing as I step into what was once my security room. Now it is something else, a warped echo chamber where time plays tricks and reality stretches thin. My footsteps echo too loudly in this place that shouldn't exist anymore. I approach the screens, their cold glow casting harsh shadows on my face. They flicker to life at my presence, displaying a scene I recognize all too well, myself standing by the clock tower, hands trembling as they turn the key. The same scene plays out again and again, an endless loop of my past self reliving that moment. But this time, there is something different, something off. My reflection on the screen seems distorted, warped like a funhouse mirror. And is it just me, or are those eyes not quite mine? They're too deep set, too empty, too hungry. I lean in closer, ignoring the chill that runs down my spine at the thought of touching the glass. The cat's shadow appears on one screen, no, not just appears, pulses into existence like a heartbeat given form. It moves with an eerie autonomy, sliding across the floor and up onto the clock face before disappearing inside. The sound reaches me then, A screech that starts high-pitched but quickly drops to something deeper, more violent. It is my voice, distorted beyond recognition, saying words I never spoke. I should have let go. My breath catches in my throat as the shadow on the screen stretches out towards its digital self towards me. The room seems to hold still around us, waiting for what comes next. The mist thickens further until it is all I can see, the sickly peach color bleeding into every corner of this twisted reflection chamber. It clings to my skin like damp fur, and I swear I hear something. No, feel something in its grasp. A faint whisper of sorrow, the weight of regret made manifest. My heart pounds in time with the clock's relentless ticking, the same rhythm that echoes through every fiber of this house, binding it together, binding us all together. Me, the cat, and whatever force drives us onward into this nightmare loop we can't escape. The shadow reaches out again, its digital form mirroring my own movements on the screens around me. And then I see them, words appearing on the monitor in front of me, pulsing with a life of their own. Just like that diary downstairs when it first began to write itself. Touch. It is not just an invitation, it is a command. I reach out slowly, tentatively, as if moving underwater. My fingers hover inches from the screen, hovering over my reflection's face, the face with those empty eyes and hollow cheeks. The mist around me seems to hold its breath in anticipation of what comes next. And then I hear it again, that distant screech that started this whole thing. But now it sounds like something else entirely, a warning. My fingers close around nothing, not the cat's neck. There is no neck, no body, only the absence where it should be. The shadow that pulsed on the screen that slid across the clock face is gone. Only the void remains, a cold space in the air where the cat's presence had been. I feel the emptiness like a physical ache, a hollow where warmth should be. The diary lies open on the console, its pages glowing faintly with liquid moonlight. The words are already there, etched in ink that seems to breathe. For the silence is complete. The screech begins again, that high, tearing sound from the clock tower's memory, but it's different now. It doesn't just rise, it heaven shatters. Like glass under a hammer, the sound fractures into 1,000 shards of noise, each one slicing deeper than the last. I clutch my ears, but the sound isn't outside. It's inside my skull, vibrating my teeth, rattling the bones in my neck. The ringing I've carried since the mist began, this constant wire-tight hum behind my eyes, suddenly stops. Not fades, settles. The silence that follows isn't quiet. It's a physical pressure, a weight pressing down on my chest, my ears, my very bones. It's the sound of the world unmaking itself. I feel the diary's spine against my palm, cold and smooth. The sickly peach mist thickens, bleeding into the veins of the room, turning the air itself into something wet and suffocating. It clings to my skin like damp fur, but I don't feel it anymore. I feel only the silence. The silence is complete. Then, the shadow, not the cat's shadow, but the two-tab sender of it. It folds, like a piece of paper folding itself, but without sound, without movement. It slides from the space where the cat should have been and into my waiting palm. It doesn't feel like a shadow. It feels like cold, wet stone. It feels like the absence of everything. The smart home lights flare, not a soft glow, but a blinding, overwhelming flood of sickly peach. It's not light. It's a fry presence, thick and cloying, filling every corner of the room, pressing against my eyelids. I can't look away. The peach light bleeds into the vein blue shadows of the screens, turning the flickering loop of my past self into a smeared, wet painting. My reflection on the screens is gone. Only the empty eyes remain, staring back at me from the distorted glass. The silence deepens. It's no longer just sound or lack of sound. It's a fithing queen. It's the weight of the diary's words in my mind. Phew. The silence is complete. Phew. I can hear it in the way my own breath stops. I can feel it in the way the mist seems to hold its breath. The clock tower's ticking is gone. The house's heartbeat, the rhythm binding us all, is gone. Only the silence remains and the shadow in my palm. I try to move my fingers to pull away, but the shadow is already Funtian-sided, my skin cold and quiet. It doesn't burn. It doesn't pulse. It's simply twinedy, izzy, and the silence. The silence is no longer empty. It's full of everything I've tried to hold back, full of the regret I've carried like a stone in my chest, full of the weight of the past I can't release. The screech was the sound of the loop breaking. This silence is the sound of it ending. The peach light swallows the last of the screens. The reflection is gone. The clock tower is silent. The house is silent. The shadow in my palm folds itself tighter. Silence.